I watched the security guard escort me through the lobby like I was some kind of criminal, my cardboard box of personal items clutched against my chest. The receptionist whispered to her colleague behind cupped hands, their eyes following my walk of shame. My manager Derek stood by the elevator with his arms crossed, that smug smile plastered across his face, like he had just solved the company's biggest problem. What they didn't know was that 6 months ago, I had quietly purchased 68% of their precious company. I was about to teach them all a very expensive lesson. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I took a deep breath as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Derek thought he had won, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. My name is Brenna Walsh, and at 28 years old, I had already built and sold a tech startup for $43 million. What happened today wasn't failure. It was research. 6 months ago, I was sitting in my lawyer's office in downtown Seattle, reviewing investment opportunities. I had been looking for my next venture, something that would challenge me in a different way than the tech world I knew so well. That's when my business broker, Patricia, brought me a folder marked Hartwell Marketing. It's a mid-sized marketing firm in Portland, she explained, spreading the financial documents across the mahogany table. They handle regional accounts, mostly small to medium businesses. The numbers show potential, but there are some red flags. I studied the papers carefully. The company had been profitable for years, but the last 18 months showed declining revenue, high employee turnover, and concerning patterns in their human resources reports. Exit interviews revealed complaints about management, workplace culture, and what several former employees described as hostile treatment of new hires. What's the asking price? I asked, already intrigued by the challenge. $7.2 million for a controlling stake. The current owners are 3 partners who want to retire. They're willing to sell 68% to maintain some involvement, but they want a hands-off buyer. That's when the idea hit me. Instead of coming in as the new owner and trying to fix problems from the top down, what if I experienced the company culture firsthand? What if I went undercover as a regular employee to understand exactly what was broken before implementing any changes? Over the next 3 months, I worked with Marcus, my attorney, to structure the purchase through a series of shell corporations and legal intermediaries. The transaction was completed without my name appearing anywhere in the public records. To the employees at Hartwell Marketing, the company had simply been sold to Walsh Capital Holdings, an investment firm they'd never heard of. While the legal work progressed, I spent weeks preparing for my undercover mission. I created a fake resume showing minimal marketing experience, mostly retail jobs, and a 2-year degree from a community college. I practiced dumbing down my vocabulary, researching the company from an outsider's perspective, and learning to dress and act like someone desperate for an entry-level position. The hardest part was suppressing my natural instincts. In my real career, I was used to asking pointed questions, challenging assumptions, and driving toward solutions. For this role, I had to become someone tentative, eager to please, and easily intimidated. It went against every fiber of my business training, but I knew it was necessary to see the real Hartwell Marketing. I spent 3 weeks watching the company from across the street, noting the body language of employees coming and going. I saw the same patterns every day, people arriving looking defeated, leaving looking even worse. The morning energy was low, the lunch breaks were solitary affairs, and the end-of-day exodus happened with unusual speed for a supposedly thriving workplace. The background checks I commissioned revealed more troubling details. Derek Hamilton, the operations manager, had been with the company for 6 years. Had started as an account coordinator and worked his way up, but his promotion coincided with the beginning of the turnover problems. Linda Chen, the HR manager, had joined 2 years ago, right around the time when employee satisfaction scores nosedived. What really caught my attention was the pattern of new hire departures. In the past year, Hartwell had hired 23 people for various positions. 18 of them were terminated within their first 90 days, always for performance issues or cultural fit problems. The exit interviews were strikingly similar. Complaints about hostile treatment, impossible workloads, and managers who seemed determined to make them fail. I realized this wasn't just a company with management problems. This was a company where the management problems were intentional, systematic, and possibly covering up something much worse. The final piece of my preparation involved establishing my cover story. I rented a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, bought used furniture from thrift stores, and opened a checking account with a modest balance. I practiced my backstory until it became second nature. Recently laid off from a retail management position, struggling to pay rent, desperate for a stable job with benefits. 3 weeks ago, I submitted my application through the normal channels. 2 weeks ago, I had my interview with Linda and Derek, playing the part of an eager but slightly overwhelmed candidate. Last week, I got the call offering me the position of administrative assistant at $32,000 a year. Today was supposed to be the beginning of my investigation into what was really happening at Hartwell Marketing. I had planned to spend at least a month observing, documenting, and understanding the company culture before revealing my true identity and implementing changes. Instead, Derek had fired me before lunch on my first day. As I walked to my car in the parking garage, I couldn't help but smile. Derek thought he was protecting his territory by getting rid of a potential threat. What he had actually done was give me all the evidence I needed to understand exactly how toxic the leadership had become. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. I had arrived at Hartwell Marketing at 7:30 that morning, a full 30 minutes before my 8 o'clock start time. I wanted to make a good impression, show up early, and demonstrate that I was serious about the job. I wore a plain navy blue blouse from Target, black slacks that were slightly too long, and comfortable but unremarkable shoes. Everything about my appearance screamed trying too hard, but doesn't quite have it figured out yet. The receptionist, Jessica, seemed surprised to see me so early. She was a young woman, probably fresh out of college, with kind eyes but a nervous energy that I immediately recognized. She kept glancing toward the hallway as if expecting someone to appear and criticize her for talking to me. "Oh, you're the new administrative assistant," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Derek left some instructions for you on your desk. He said to get started right away when you arrived." I followed her to a small cubicle near the back of the office. The desk was covered with 5 large boxes of files, a stack of phone directories from what looked like different years, and a note written in sharp handwriting. "Reorganize all client files by date and alphabetical order. Must be completed by 10 a.m. Also answer all incoming calls and greet any walk-in clients. Do not ask for help." I stared at the note, calculating the impossibility of the task. 5 years' worth of client files, thousands of documents, reorganized in 2 hours while also handling receptionist duties. It was clearly designed to set me up for failure, but I had to play the part of someone who didn't understand that yet. At 8:15, Derek Hamilton made his entrance. He was a tall man in his early 40s, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite hide his growing gut. His hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his own importance was obvious to everyone around him. "Well, well," he said, stopping at my cubicle with his arms crossed. "The new girl is here early. That's something, I guess." His tone made it clear that showing up early was somehow suspicious rather than commendable. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton," I said, standing up and extending my hand for a handshake. "I'm really excited to be part of the team." Derek looked at my outstretched hand like I was offering him a dead fish. "Yeah, well, see about that. Did you read your assignment?" "Yes, sir. I was just getting started on the filing system." "Getting started?" Derek's voice rose loud enough for several nearby employees to look up from their desks. "It's 8:15. You should be halfway done by now if you had any clue what you were doing." I felt my cheeks flush, exactly the way someone in my supposed position would react. "I'm sorry, I was just trying to understand the system before I began moving things around." Derek rolled his eyes dramatically. Are you serious right now? This is basic stuff. Filing is filing. If you need to understand the system for something this simple, maybe this job is already over your head. The cruelty in his voice was unmistakable, and I saw other employees quickly look away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. This wasn't just poor management. This was deliberate humiliation designed to break someone's confidence from minute one. Throughout the morning, Derek continued his performance. When the phone rang, he would appear at my cubicle within seconds, criticizing how I answered or how long I took to transfer calls. When a client walked in looking for directions, Derek materialized to loudly correct my instructions, making it seem like I had been giving wrong information. At 9:30, Derek called everyone into the conference room for the daily staff meeting. I grabbed a notepad and pen, trying to look eager and professional. Derek seated himself at the head of the table and immediately put me on the spot. Brenna, since you're new, why don't you tell everyone about your experience with integrated marketing campaigns? My heart sank. This was exactly the kind of question designed to expose someone who didn't belong. I had to fumble through an answer that showed my supposed inexperience without completely embarrassing myself. Well, I don't have direct experience with integrated campaigns, I said, trying to sound earnest rather than defensive. But am really eager to learn about how all the different marketing pieces work together. Derek turned to the rest of the room with an exaggerated expression of disbelief. She doesn't have experience with integrated campaigns, but she applied for a position at a marketing firm. Does anyone else see a problem with this? Sarah from accounting shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Tom from the creative department stared at his hands. A few people actually snickered, though I could see some were more uncomfortable than amused. I mean, I understand the basic concepts. I tried to recover. Traditional advertising, social media, email marketing, working together to reach the same audience? Basic concepts, Derek repeated, shaking his head. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when HR doesn't properly screen candidates. We end up with someone who understands basic concepts trying to do a professional job. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Derek periodically returning to my supposed inadequacies. He asked me to explain attribution modeling, customer lifetime value calculations, and conversion funnel optimization. Each time I gave an appropriately confused and incomplete answer, he would sigh heavily and make comments about hiring standards dropping. When the meeting ended, I returned to my desk to find that Derek had assigned me a computer that was clearly malfunctioning. The screen flickered constantly, the keyboard stuck on several keys, and the mouse barely responded. When I approached him about getting IT support, his response was loud enough for the entire office to hear. Figure it out yourself. That's what problem solving looks like in the real world. If you can't handle basic technical issues, how are you going to handle client work? As the morning progressed, I began to notice something even more disturbing than Derek's individual cruelty. Other employees were starting to join in. Sarah made a comment about maybe we should have a basic skills test before hiring. Tom asked loudly if anyone knew how to explain filing to someone who doesn't get it. But the most revealing moment came when I overheard Sarah talking to Tom by the coffee machine. She thought I was too far away to hear, but years of business negotiations had taught me to have excellent hearing for whispered conversations. How long do you think this one will last? Sarah asked. Derek got rid of the last 3 new hires the same way, Tom replied. Remember Marcus? He lasted 2 days. And Jennifer made it almost a week before Derek found an excuse to fire her. Linda always backs him up, Sarah added. She'll have some HR reason ready to go. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just Derek being a terrible manager. This was a systematic pattern. Derek was deliberately destroying new employees, and Linda from HR was helping him cover it up with legitimate-sounding termination reasons. The question was why. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every impossible task, every moment of public humiliation. But I also started paying attention to the deeper patterns. Derek's behavior wasn't random cruelty. It was strategic. designed to make people quit or give him clear grounds for termination. By 11:45, I knew exactly what was coming next. Derek had been building his case all morning, creating witnesses to my supposed incompetence and insubordination. The phone calls I'd transferred slowly. The filing I couldn't complete. The questions I couldn't answer in the meeting. It was all evidence for my termination file. What Derek didn't know was that I'd been in business long enough to recognize exactly what he was doing. And tomorrow, when I returned as the majority owner of this company, I was going to make sure he understood the true cost of treating people the way he had treated me. At exactly noon, Derek appeared at my cubicle with Linda Chen trailing behind him. Linda was a woman in her mid-30s, with perfectly styled hair and a clipboard that she held like a shield. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the anticipation in her eyes. This was clearly a routine they had performed before. "Brenna, we need you in the conference room," Derek announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Bring your things." The phrasing was deliberate. Bring your things was code that everyone in the office understood. And I saw several people exchange glances. The few personal items I'd brought, a coffee mug, a small plant, a picture frame with a stock photo still in it, suddenly felt heavy in my hands. The walk to the conference room felt like a death march. Derek led the way with confident strides. Linda walked beside me, taking notes on her clipboard, and I followed behind, carrying my pathetic collection of belongings. Other employees pretended to work, but I could feel their eyes tracking our movement across the office. Inside the conference room, Derek closed the door with theatrical precision. Linda took her seat and opened a folder that was already thick with documents. Derek remained standing, positioning himself across from me like a prosecutor addressing a defendant. "Brenna, this is obviously difficult, but we need to address some serious performance issues that have emerged during your first morning with us," Derek began, his voice taking on a tone of false concern. I noticed how carefully he was phrasing everything. Performance issues that have emerged suggested this was a recent development rather than something they had planned from the beginning. "Your first morning emphasized how quickly I had supposedly failed," Linda jumped in with her prepared remarks. "We've documented several instances of behavior that suggest you're not a good fit for our company culture." She began reading from her clipboard. "Failure to complete assigned tasks within specified timeframes. Inability to answer basic questions relevant to your position. Disruptive behavior during team meetings. Inappropriate use of company resources." Each accusation was technically accurate but completely devoid of context. Yes, I hadn't completed the filing because it was physically impossible in the time given. Yes, I couldn't answer advanced marketing questions because I was supposed to be an entry-level employee. Yes, I had been disruptive in the meeting, but only because Derek had deliberately put me on the spot. The inappropriate use of company resources was particularly creative. Apparently, my request for IT support to fix the broken computer counted as wasting company time and resources. Derek took over, warming to his performance. "Look, Brenna, this isn't personal. Sometimes people just aren't ready for the pace and expectations of a professional environment. There's no shame in that, but we have to protect the integrity of our workplace." "But I was trying my best," I said, letting a slight tremor creep into my voice. "This is only my first day. Couldn't I have some time to adjust and learn?" Derek's expression shifted to condescending sympathy. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. This attitude that you deserve special accommodation, that the rules should be different for you. In a professional environment, you need to hit the ground running." Linda nodded sagely. "We've found that employees who struggle this significantly on their first day rarely improve. It's better for everyone to address the situation quickly rather than letting it drag out." "So you're firing me?" I asked, making sure my voice carried just the right note of devastation. "We're ending your employment? Effective immediately," Derek corrected, "for poor performance and inability to adapt to company standards." The legal phrasing was clearly Linda's contribution. They weren't firing me, they were ending my employment. It wasn't because Derek was cruel, it was for poor performance. Everything was carefully worded to protect the company from any potential legal challenges. You'll need to return any company property and clear out your workspace, Linda continued. Security will escort you to ensure company policy is followed. As we left the conference room, Derek made sure to speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. This is what happens when you can't handle a real work environment. Some people just aren't cut out for professional jobs. The walk back to my cubicle was pure theater. Derek positioned himself where he could watch my face, clearly expecting tears or pleading. Linda walked slightly behind me, documenting everything for what I assumed would become my official termination file. Other employees stared openly now, no longer pretending to work. At my desk, I gathered my few belongings under their watchful eyes. The cardboard box they provided was comically large for my meager possessions, which only added to the humiliation. As I packed, I heard whispered conversations around the office. That was fast, even for Derek. She seemed nice enough. Remember what happened to Jennifer. But I also heard other comments that revealed how Derek's behavior had poisoned the workplace culture. Maybe she really wasn't qualified. Derek doesn't have time to babysit people who can't keep up. At least now we know the position will go to someone competent. As the security guard arrived to escort me out, I caught a crucial conversation between Linda and Derek. They thought they were speaking quietly, but I had positioned myself to overhear. Make sure the paperwork shows termination during probationary period, Linda whispered. Performance-based, with documentation of specific incidents. What about the budget numbers for this quarter? Derek replied. I'll adjust the headcount projections. Keep the salary line item for now and mark it as allocated but unfilled. Perfect. That should keep our efficiency ratings where they need to be. In that moment, everything became clear. They weren't just firing people for sport. They were manipulating the company's financial reports, keeping salary budgets for positions they had no intention of actually filling, and using rapid terminations to make their department look more efficient than it actually was. The security escort through the lobby was Derek's final humiliation. He had timed it perfectly for the lunch hour, ensuring maximum visibility. Employees returning from lunch watched me being walked out like I was some kind of security threat. The receptionist, Jessica, looked genuinely upset, but she was powerless to do anything. As the elevator doors closed, Derek waved goodbye with exaggerated sadness. Good luck finding somewhere that will tolerate your attitude, he called out, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. I maintained my composure throughout the entire ordeal, but inside, I was meticulously cataloging every detail. The fake performance review, the manipulated paperwork, the financial irregularities, the systematic humiliation designed to break someone's spirit. It was all evidence of a much larger problem than simple workplace bullying. When I reached my car in the parking garage, I sat quietly for a moment, processing what I had just experienced. Derek thought he had won, that he had successfully eliminated another potential threat to his little kingdom. Linda believed she had protected the company with her carefully crafted documentation. What neither of them realized was that they had just committed multiple acts of fraud and embezzlement against a company I owned. Tomorrow, when I returned as Brenna Walsh, majority shareholder and CEO of Hartwell Marketing, they were going to learn a very expensive lesson about the consequences of treating people with cruelty and disrespect. The drive back to my real office took 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. I had gone into this expecting to find management problems. What I had discovered was systematic abuse, financial fraud, and a workplace culture so toxic it was destroying the company from within. Derek and Linda thought they were protecting their positions by eliminating threats. What they had actually done was give me a front row seat to their criminal behavior. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. I drove straight to my real office, a sleek space on the 15th floor of a downtown Portland high-rise. The contrast with Hartwell Marketing couldn't have been sharper. Here, floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of the city, modern furniture reflected the success ID, and most importantly, I had access to resources that Derek and Linda couldn't imagine. My first call was to Marcus, the attorney who had handled the Hartwell acquisition. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the anticipation in his voice. "Brenna, how did the first day of undercover work go?" "They fired me before lunch," I said, unable to keep the dark humor out of my voice. "That was fast, even for a dysfunctional company. What happened?" I spent 20 minutes walking him through every detail of the morning's events, from Derek's impossible assignments to the humiliating conference room performance to the suspicious conversation between Derek and Linda about budget numbers and headcount projections. Marcus was taking notes, and I could hear his pen scratching furiously. "Brenna, what you're describing sounds like more than just workplace harassment. The budget manipulation you overheard suggests possible embezzlement." "That's exactly what I was thinking. Can we access the company's financial records without tipping them off?" "As majority owner, you have every right to review financial documents. But if we're dealing with fraud, we need to be careful about how we proceed. Let me call Jennifer from the accounting firm. She can start a preliminary audit while we gather other evidence." After hanging up with Marcus, I spent the next hour accessing Hartwell's financial systems. The previous owners had given me all the login credentials and passwords as part of the transition, though Derek and Linda had no idea those records were now in my hands. What I found was deeply disturbing. The payroll records showed a pattern that stretched back 18 months. Hartwell was paying salaries for 27 employees, but my observation of the office that morning had shown only 16 people actually working there. 11 positions were listed as filled with active salary payments going out every 2 weeks. I cross-referenced the names on the payroll against the employee database and found exactly what I suspected. Marcus Thompson, Jennifer Wright, David Rodriguez, and 8 others were all listed as current employees receiving salaries between $30,000 and $45,000 annually. But none of these people actually existed. The fake employee files were surprisingly sophisticated. Each phantom worker had a complete HR record including social security numbers, addresses, emergency contacts, and even performance reviews written in Linda's handwriting. The addresses were real, but when I looked them up, they led to vacant lots, demolished buildings, or businesses that had never heard of these supposed employees. The social security numbers were the smoking gun. A quick verification through the Social Security Administration database, which I could access through my legitimate business accounts, showed that 5 of the numbers belonged to deceased individuals, 3 were completely invalid, and the remaining 3 had been issued to people in different states who had no connection to Oregon or Hartwell Marketing. Over the past 18 months, Derek and Linda had stolen approximately $237,000 through this fake employee scheme. They were essentially running a payroll fraud operation, collecting salaries for people who didn't exist while using rapid terminations of real employees to cover their tracks. But the financial fraud was just part of the story. I spent another hour reaching out to former Hartwell employees, using LinkedIn and professional networks to track down people who had been fired over the past year. Marcus Thompson, not the fake payroll Marcus but a real former employee, answered my call on the 3rd ring. He had been terminated 4 months ago after 3 weeks on the job. "Hartwell Marketing was the worst work experience of my life," he told me. "Derek Hamilton was absolutely brutal. He gave me assignments that were impossible to complete, then screamed at me in front of other employees when I couldn't finish them." "Did you suspect anything unusual about the company's operations?" "Actually, yes. I was hired to do accounts receivable, but when I started reviewing the client files, the numbers didn't add up. There were invoices for services we weren't actually providing, and several client accounts showed payments for employees I never saw around the office." "Did you try to report these discrepancies?" I mentioned it to Derek, thinking he'd want to know about potential billing errors. He went ballistic, accused me of being incompetent and trying to cause trouble. 2 days later, Linda called me into HR and fired me for performance issues and disruptive behavior. I spoke with 6 more former employees over the next 2 hours. Each told the same story: rapid termination after asking questions or noticing irregularities. Always with Linda providing HR cover for Derek's abusive behavior. 2 of them mentioned seeing employee names on office directories for people they never actually met. Jennifer Wright, a real person unlike her payroll namesake, had been hired as a marketing coordinator 5 months ago. Derek seemed determined to make me fail from day one, she explained. But the weird thing was, Linda kept asking me about my address and social security number, like she was trying to memorize them. When I asked why she needed that information so often, she said it was for updating our systems. How long did you last? 8 days. Derek fired me for asking too many questions and showing poor judgment. But I kept getting W-2 forms and tax documents from Hartwell for months after I left. When I called to tell them to stop, Linda said it was a computer error and they'd fix it. The pattern was becoming clear. Derek and Linda would hire legitimate employees, collect their personal information during onboarding, then fire them quickly while keeping their identities active in the payroll system. They were literally stealing people's identities to create phantom workers. My phone rang as I was documenting these conversations. It was Jennifer, the forensic accountant Marcus had contacted. Brenna, I've done a preliminary review of Hartwell's books, and what you've discovered is just the tip of the iceberg, she said. The fake employee scheme is sophisticated, but they've also been manipulating client billing, inflating expense reports, and possibly skimming money from vendor payments. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? They've stolen over $400,000 in the past 2 years. And it's accelerating. The theft rate has increased significantly in the past 6 months. Since around the time the company was sold. Exactly. I think Derek and Linda knew the ownership was changing and decided to grab as much as they could before anyone noticed. I spent the rest of the afternoon building a comprehensive case file. Financial records showing the fake payroll, testimonials from wrongfully terminated employees, evidence of identity theft and systematic workplace abuse, documentation of budget manipulation, and false reporting to company ownership. By 6 p.m., I had enough evidence to not only fire Derek and Linda, but to have them arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. Marcus had already contacted the Portland Police Bureau's white-collar crime division, and Detective Rodriguez would be ready to execute search warrants first thing in the morning. But I wanted to do more than just seek justice. I wanted to send a message that would resonate throughout the business community. Derek and Linda had created a culture of fear and cruelty, using their positions of power to abuse vulnerable employees while literally stealing from the company. Tomorrow, I would return to Hartwell Marketing as myself, not as the desperate job seeker they had humiliated and discarded, but as the owner of the company they had been systematically destroying. They thought they had gotten rid of a problem. Instead, they had revealed themselves as the real problem. I called Marcus back as I prepared to leave the office. Everything is documented and ready to go. The police will have enough evidence for arrests, and we have sufficient grounds for immediate termination and civil recovery. How do you want to handle the reveal tomorrow? I'm going to walk in at 8 a.m. and introduce myself as the majority owner. I want to see their faces when they realize who they fired yesterday. Are you sure you don't want to let the attorneys handle this? No. This is personal now. Derek and Linda didn't just commit crimes against the company. They've been destroying people's lives for sport while stealing money to line their own pockets. They're going to hear exactly what I think of them, and they're going to hear it from me. As I drove home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the employees I'd met that morning. Jessica, the nervous receptionist who clearly lived in fear of Derek's moods. Sarah, from accounting, who was uncomfortable with his behavior but too scared to speak up. Tom, from creative, who had been pressured into joining the bullying to protect his own job. Tomorrow wasn't just about justice for Derek and Linda's crimes. It was about creating a workplace where people could do their jobs without fear, where asking questions was encouraged rather than punished, and where treating colleagues with respect was the foundation of company culture. Derek thought he had taught me a lesson about power. Tomorrow, I was going to teach him one right back. I arrived at Hartwell Marketing at exactly 8 a.m., but this time everything was different. Instead of my Target clothes and nervous energy, I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit that had cost more than most people made in a month. My leather briefcase contained legal documents that would change everything, and my confidence came from knowing I held all the cards. The receptionist, Jessica, did a double take when she saw me walking through the lobby. Her eyes widened with confusion, then concern, then something that looked like fear. Brenna, she said hesitantly. I thought you were, didn't you? Good morning, Jessica, I said warmly. Is Derek in yet? Yes, but I don't think you should, she started to say, then stopped herself. Has going to be really upset that you came back. I could see her internal struggle. Jessica was clearly a kind person who felt bad about what had happened yesterday, but she was also terrified of crossing Derek. The fact that she was trying to warn me spoke well of her character. It's going to be fine, I assured her. Is everyone else here? Before Jessica could answer, Derek's voice boomed across the lobby. What the hell is this? He came striding toward us, his face already red with anger. Several other employees had noticed the commotion and were gathering to watch. I could see Sarah from accounting hovering near the coffee machine, and Tom from creative had stepped out of his office. I told you yesterday that you're not welcome here, Derek continued, his voice rising with each word. This is trespassing. Jessica, call security right now. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a business card, extending it toward Derek with perfect calm. Derek, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Brenna Walsh, majority owner of Hartwell Marketing. Derek looked at the card like I was handing him a piece of garbage. This is pathetic. You're having some kind of breakdown. Security. He grabbed the card and crumpled it up without reading it, throwing it on the floor for dramatic effect. Several employees gasped at the disrespect, but Derek was too focused on his performance to notice. You were terminated yesterday for performance issues, Derek announced loudly. Now you're back with fake business cards and delusions of grandeur. This is exactly the kind of unstable behavior we were worried about. Linda appeared from the direction of the HR office, moving quickly toward us. She was carrying a folder that I assumed contained yesterday's termination paperwork. Brenna, this behavior is completely inappropriate, Linda said in her most professional tone. You were terminated yesterday during your probationary period. Returning to the workplace uninvited constitutes harassment and potentially trespassing. She's claiming to be the owner of the company, Derek added with a laugh. She's obviously having some kind of psychotic episode, Derek demanded, turning to the security guard who had appeared. This woman is trespassing, and she's clearly unstable. She needs to be removed immediately. The security guard, a middle-aged man named Frank, looked deeply uncomfortable. Sir, maybe we should just verify her identity before we verify her identity, Derek exploded. She was fired yesterday. She's a failed employee having a mental breakdown. Call the police right now. Linda stepped forward with her folder. We have complete documentation of yesterday's termination. Performance issues, disruptive behavior, inability to meet basic job requirements. This return visit confirms our assessment that she has serious psychological problems. I remained perfectly calm throughout their performance, which seemed to frustrate Derek even more. I pulled out my phone and held it up. Derek, I'm going to call the Portland police myself. When they arrive, they can verify my identity with the Secretary of State's office, the Better Business Bureau, and the IRS. They can also review the corporate filings that show Walsh Capital Holdings as the majority owner of this company. Go ahead, Derek sneered. When they get here, they can arrest you for trespassing, harassment, and whatever other charges apply to someone who's clearly having a breakdown. In fact, I continued, while we wait for them to arrive, I'm calling an all-hands meeting. Everyone except Derek and Linda should gather in the conference room in 5 minutes. You can't call a meeting, Derek shouted. You don't work here. You're trespassing. But something interesting was happening. The employees who had gathered to watch were starting to look uncertain. My calm demeanor and professional appearance contrasted sharply with Derek's increasingly manic behavior. A few people were whispering to each other, and I caught fragments of their conversations. She does seem different today. Those documents looked real. Why would she come back if she was lying? Jessica, the receptionist, was staring at my business card on the floor where Derek had thrown it. She bent down and picked it up, smoothing out the wrinkles. Her eyes widened as she read it. Derek, she said hesitantly. This card says Walsh Capital Holdings. Isn't that the company that bought us 6 months ago? Derek's face went pale for just a moment before the red anger returned. It's a coincidence. She probably looked up the name online. She's trying to scam her way back into a job. But the damage was done. Other employees had heard Jessica's observation, and I could see the doubt spreading through the group. Sarah, from accounting, was pulling out her phone, probably to look up Walsh Capital Holdings online. Tom, from creative, was staring at me with a completely different expression than Head had yesterday. 5 minutes. I announced again. Conference room. Everyone except Derek and Linda. Don't you dare. Derek screamed, but several employees were already moving toward the conference room. His authority was cracking in real time, and he knew it. Linda tried to regain control. Nobody move. This woman was terminated yesterday. She has no authority here whatsoever. If anyone attends her fake meeting, it will be considered insubordination. The employees had seen Derek destroy what appeared to be official documents, watched him refuse to even examine evidence, and witnessed his increasingly erratic behavior. Several of them were already walking toward the conference room, curiosity overcoming fear. Security, Derek yelled one more time. Arrest her right now. Frank, the security guard, was looking more uncomfortable by the minute. Sir, I think we should wait for the police to sort this out. I don't have authority to arrest someone without clear evidence of a crime. Derek's confident demeanor was completely gone now. He was sweating, his voice was cracking, and his hands were shaking as he pointed at me. She's lying. She's a fraud. Everyone who believes her is going to be fired. The threat had exactly the opposite effect Derek intended. Instead of intimidating people, it reminded them of exactly the kind of behavior that had made working at Hartwell so miserable. Several more employees headed toward the conference room. Derek, I said quietly, I think you should sit down. You're about to learn something very important about the consequences of treating people with cruelty and disrespect. As employees filed past us toward the meeting, Derek made one last desperate play. Linda, call the corporate office. Call the owners. Tell them there's someone here impersonating them. Linda was frantically dialing numbers on her phone, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She was starting to realize that if I was telling the truth, her carefully constructed fraud was about to be exposed. The conference room was filling up, and I could hear excited conversations as employees tried to figure out what was happening. In a few minutes, I would reveal the truth about Derek and Linda's crimes. But first, I wanted to give them one more chance to dig themselves even deeper. Derek, Linda, I said with perfect calm. Last chance. Would you like to reconsider your position about who I am? Derek's final answer was exactly what I expected. You're a liar, a fraud, and a criminal. When the police get here, you're going to jail. Perfect. In a few minutes, when Detective Rodriguez and Detective Chen arrived with arrest warrants, Derek would discover exactly who was going to jail. Before Derek could follow through on his threat to call the police, the front door opened and 2 people in professional attire walked in. Detective Rodriguez was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, and Detective Chen was a younger man carrying a briefcase that I knew contained search warrants. Following behind them was Marcus, my attorney, looking every inch the successful lawyer in his perfectly tailored suit. Derek's face lit up with vindication. Officers! Thank God you're here. This woman is trespassing and harassing employees. She's claiming to own the company and trying to hold some kind of illegal meeting. Detective Rodriguez showed her badge and introduced herself calmly. I'm Detective Rodriguez, Portland Police Bureau, White Collar Crime Division. This is Detective Chen. We're here to execute search warrants related to reports of embezzlement and fraud at this company. The color drained from Derek's face so fast I thought he might faint. Linda, who had been standing slightly behind him, took an unconscious step backward. Embezzlement, Derek stammered. There must be some mistake. We called you about this woman who's trespassing and… Sir, you didn't call us, Detective Chen interrupted. We're here on complaints filed by the legal counsel representing the majority owner of Hartwell Marketing. Marcus stepped forward and nodded to me. Detectives, this is my client, Brenna Walsh, majority shareholder and CEO of Hartwell Marketing. That's impossible, Derek shouted, but his voice cracked on the last word. She's lying. She was fired yesterday. Show them the paperwork, Linda. Linda fumbled with her folder, pulling out the termination documents she had prepared. But her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the papers. Detective Rodriguez examined the documents briefly. According to our investigation, these termination papers were filed fraudulently. Ms. Walsh was conducting an undercover investigation of management practices at her own company. Undercover. Derek's voice was barely a whisper now. I addressed the gathered employees, many of whom were watching from the conference room doorway. 6 months ago, I purchased 68% of Hartwell Marketing through Walsh Capital Holdings. I came here yesterday, undercover as a new employee, to understand why this company was struggling with high turnover and declining performance. That's not possible, Linda said. But her professional facade was crumbling. We would have been informed of any ownership changes. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out official documents. The sale was completed through legal intermediaries to maintain confidentiality. Here are the Secretary of State filings, the purchase agreements, and the corporate registration documents. Detective Chen was already moving toward Derek. Derek Hamilton, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. Identity theft. Derek backed against the wall. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. I don't know what you're talking about. We have evidence that you and Linda Chen have been operating a payroll fraud scheme involving fake employees. Detective Rodriguez explained as she pulled out handcuffs. You've been stealing salaries for non-existent workers while systematically firing legitimate employees to cover your tracks. Linda tried to run, but Detective Chen was already positioning himself at the back exit. Linda Chen, you're also under arrest for conspiracy, embezzlement, and wire fraud. The transformation in the office atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Employees who had been cowering in fear of Derek just minutes before were now staring in shock as he was handcuffed. Several people pulled out their phones to record the scene. This is insane, Derek shouted as Detective Rodriguez read him his rights. She's lying. She was fired. Check the records. Mr. Hamilton, I said quietly. Yesterday you told me that some people just aren't cut out for professional jobs. Today you're learning that some people aren't cut out for honest work. As the detectives secured Derek and Linda, I addressed the staff who had gathered to witness the unprecedented scene. I know this is shocking, but I want everyone to understand what's been happening here. For the past 18 months, Derek and Linda have been stealing money from this company while creating a workplace culture designed to break people's spirits and drive them away. Sarah from accounting stepped forward, tears in her eyes. I knew something was wrong with the payroll numbers. Derek threatened to fire me if I kept asking questions about employees I never saw. Tom from the creative department looked devastated. He made me treat new people badly. He said if I didn't go along with his methods, it'd be next on the firing list. I'm so sorry about yesterday. Jessica, the receptionist, was sobbing openly. He made me lie to new employees about company policies. He said it was to test their problem-solving skills. but I knew it was just meant to confuse them. As Derek was led toward the door in handcuffs, he made one final desperate attempt to maintain his narrative. You can't prove anything. This is all fake. She's not who she says she is. Detective Rodriguez paused and looked back at him. Mr. Hamilton, we have bank records showing you diverted over $200,000 in fraudulent payroll payments to accounts in your name. We have testimony from 12 former employees documenting your systematic harassment. We have computer records showing you, and Ms. Chen created fake employee profiles using stolen identity information from people you'd fired. The investigation has been ongoing for 2 weeks. Detective Chen added, we have enough evidence for multiple felony convictions. Linda, who had remained silent during her arrest, finally spoke up. Derek made me do it. He said the company was being sold anyway, and we might as well take what we could get. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Derek screamed at her. Blame me for everything. See if I care. As they were led out of the building, Derek's final words echoed through the lobby. You'll never make this company work. You're just like all the other failed new hires. The irony was lost on him, but it wasn't lost on anyone else. The employees stood in stunned silence for several minutes after the police cars drove away. Then, slowly, people began to talk. How long were they stealing money? No wonder our bonuses were always canceled. Remember Marcus Thompson? Derek said he quit. But now I think he was fired for asking questions. I called everyone into the conference room for the meeting I had originally requested. This time, there was no resistance, no fear, just a group of employees trying to process what they had witnessed. I know today has been overwhelming, I began. But I want you to understand that everything changes starting now. Derek and Linda were not just bad managers. They were criminals who used fear and intimidation to cover up their theft. Over the next hour, the full scope of the fraud became clear. Employee after employee came forward with stories of suspicious behavior they had been too afraid to report. The fake employee scheme, the manipulated budgets, the systematic harassment of anyone who asked questions. It had all been designed to protect Derek and Linda's criminal operation. But more importantly, I began to see the real Hartwell marketing emerging. Without Derek's toxic presence, employees started speaking up with ideas, suggestions, and genuine enthusiasm for their work. Sarah revealed she had a business degree and had been developing ideas for improving the company's financial systems. Tom showed me a portfolio of creative work that Derek had rejected without review. By the end of the day, it was clear that Hartwell marketing had far more potential than I had imagined. The problem had never been the employees or even the business model. The problem had been two criminals who had turned the workplace into their personal ATM while destroying morale and driving away talent. As I prepared to leave that evening, Jessica approached me hesitantly. Miss Walsh, I just wanted to say thank you. I was so scared of Derek that I was looking for another job. Now I feel like maybe I can actually enjoy coming to work. Jessica, you don't have to thank me. Derek and Linda were the problem, not you. Tomorrow we start building the company. This should have been all along. The drive home that night was completely different from the day before. Instead of anger and frustration, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, but more importantly, I had learned exactly what kind of leader I wanted to be. Derek had taught me a valuable lesson, though not the one he intended. True power doesn't come from breaking people down. It comes from building them up, creating environments where people can thrive, and treating every employee with the respect and dignity they deserve. Tomorrow would begin the real work of transforming Hartwell marketing. But tonight I was content knowing that Derek and Linda would have plenty of time in prison to reflect on the consequences of their choices. 2 weeks later, I stood in the same conference room where Derek had humiliated me, but everything had changed. The room was full of employees, but instead of fear and tension, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement and possibility. We were holding our first official company meeting since the arrests, and the transformation was remarkable. Derek had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement, wire fraud, and identity theft. Linda received 12 months plus 3 years of probation after cooperating with prosecutors and agreeing to testify against Derek. The insurance company had already recovered the stolen funds, and we had received an additional settlement from Derek's seized assets. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was watching people who had been broken down and demoralized discover their potential in an environment built on respect and trust. Sarah Mitchell, who had been terrified to speak up about financial irregularities under Derek's reign, was now our interim chief financial officer. Her business degree and natural analytical skills made her perfect for the role, and she had already identified 3 areas where we could improve efficiency without cutting jobs. The quarterly numbers show a 30% increase in productivity, Sarah reported to the room. But more importantly, our employee satisfaction scores have gone from 32% to 87% in just 2 weeks. Tom Rodriguez, the creative director who had been pressured into joining Derek's bullying, was now leading our rebranding initiative. "I want to apologize again to everyone for my behavior during the Derek era," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was scared for my job, and I let that fear make me complicit in treating people badly. That will never happen again." Jessica Martinez, our former receptionist, had accepted my offer to become my executive assistant. Her natural organizational skills and genuine care for people made her invaluable in coordinating the company's transformation. "We've received applications from 43 people for various positions," Jessica reported. "But most interesting, 9 of the 12 employees that Derek wrongfully terminated have asked to come back." I had spent the morning interviewing those former employees. Marcus Thompson, the real one, not Derek's payroll phantom, was eager to return to his accounts receivable position. Jennifer Wright wanted to rejoin the marketing team. David Chen, no relation to Linda, was interested in heading up our new customer service department. "I want to hire back everyone who was wrongfully terminated by Derek," I announced to the room. "Not only will they receive full back pay for the time they were unemployed, but they'll also get priority consideration for promotions as we expand." The response was immediate applause, but I could see something more important in their faces: hope. For the first time in months, maybe years, the employees of Hartwell Marketing believed they were part of something positive. "I also want to implement some new policies that will ensure what happened with Derek and Linda can never happen again," I continued. "First, we're establishing an anonymous reporting system for any concerns about management behavior or financial irregularities. Second, we're bringing in an independent HR consultant to review all our employment practices. Third, every manager will undergo training on ethical leadership and respectful workplace communication." The changes went beyond policies. Over the past 2 weeks, I had seen the real culture of Hartwell Marketing emerge. Without Derek's toxic influence, people were collaborating, sharing ideas, and genuinely caring about the company's success. Revenue was already increasing, as our improved morale translated into better client service. But the most meaningful transformation was personal. The employees who had been crushed under Derek's systematic cruelty were rediscovering their confidence and professional skills. "I have an announcement," Sarah said, standing up with a smile I had never seen during Derek's time. "Last week, I was afraid to speak up about a $10 discrepancy in petty cash. Today, I presented a comprehensive plan for improving our financial systems that could save the company $50,000 annually." Tom stood up next. "Under Derek, I was told my creative ideas were unrealistic and not practical for our clients. In the past 2 weeks, we've implemented 3 of those supposedly unrealistic ideas, and they've resulted in 2 new client contracts." The transformation wasn't limited to the workplace. I had kept in touch with several of the wrongfully terminated employees, and they reported that Derek's psychological abuse had affected them far beyond work. Marcus Thompson had struggled with depression and self-doubt after being fired. Jennifer Wright had questioned her professional abilities and considered leaving marketing entirely. "Having my job back and receiving that apology means more than just the paycheck," Marcus told the room. Derek made me believe I was incompetent. Working here now, I remember that I'm actually good at what I do. 6 months later, the changes were even more dramatic. Hartwell Marketing had grown from 16 demoralized employees to 32 enthusiastic team members. We had won 3 industry awards for workplace culture and innovation. Our client satisfaction scores had improved by 60%, and revenue was up 40% from the previous year. More importantly, we had become a case study in ethical business transformation. I had been invited to speak at 6 industry conferences about leadership, workplace culture, and the cost of toxic management. The story of Derek's downfall and our company's recovery had been featured in business magazines and management journals. But the real measure of success was simpler and more personal. People enjoyed coming to work. They felt valued, respected, and empowered to contribute their best ideas. Nobody lived in fear of arbitrary criticism or sudden termination. The final piece of justice came 8 months after Derek's arrest. He filed an appeal of his conviction, claiming that his treatment of employees was standard management practice and that the embezzlement charges were exaggerated. The appeals court not only rejected his arguments but increased his sentence to 24 months, citing his lack of remorse and continued attempts to justify criminal behavior. Linda, who had cooperated with prosecutors and shown genuine remorse for her actions, was released after serving 10 months. She sent me a letter apologizing for her role in the fraud and thanking me for treating her more fairly than I deserved. She had found work as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit organization and was rebuilding her life. As I reflected on the entire experience, I realized that Derek had taught me something valuable, though not at all what he intended. He had shown me that true leadership isn't about power over people. It's about power with people. It's about creating environments where everyone can succeed, where questions are welcomed rather than punished, and where treating colleagues with respect is the foundation of everything we do. The woman who had been escorted out of the building in humiliation had returned as a leader committed to ensuring that no employee would ever again face the cruelty and abuse that Derek had normalized. The company that had been rotting from within due to systematic fraud and toxic management had become a thriving workplace where people could reach their potential. Derek thought he was teaching me a lesson about knowing my place. Instead, he taught me something far more valuable: that my place was as a leader who protects people rather than exploits them, who builds people up rather than tears them down, and who understands that a company's greatest asset is always the dignity and potential of its people. In the end, the person who benefited most from ethical leadership was the leader herself. Building a company culture based on respect and trust hadn't just saved Hartwell Marketing. It had given me a sense of purpose and satisfaction that no amount of money could buy. Derek's final prediction had been that I would never make the company work, that I was just another failed new hire. He was wrong about everything, but especially about that. The truth was simpler and more powerful. When you treat people with dignity and create systems that reward honesty rather than punish it, success becomes inevitable. The best revenge isn't just justice served. It's proving that kindness and integrity aren't weaknesses to be exploited, but strengths that create lasting value for everyone involved. I want to ask you something. Have you ever experienced a workplace bully who seemed untouchable, or witnessed someone abuse their power because they thought no one could stop them? How did it make you feel? And what do you think it takes to create real change in toxic work environments? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories and insights about standing up to workplace injustice. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to show support for anyone who's fighting against workplace abuse. Subscribe to hear more stories about people who found the courage to fight back against injustice and create positive change. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about standing up for what's right, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept that cruelty and dishonesty are just the way things are. You have more power than you think to create the change you want to see, both in your workplace and in the world.